limits, man. Okay, calm down.
Your reporting on this has earned you a lot of media coverage, and it's even earned you praise from people like Robert Reich. And I'm not going to hold this against you, but from Paul Krugman. It's okay. This is a safe space. But I bring up Paul Krugman because it's important, I think, to note that you are not a lib or resistance lib. You obviously are critical of Trump, but you're not uncritical, to say the least, of the Democrats. So I want to ask you, how did the Democrats enable or facilitate Trump kind of generally, but also what we're now seeing with Trump and Musk and Doge?
Yeah, so I think there's two elements. And of course, the topic of how the Democrats enabled the current kind of fascist takeover, there's manifold. But in terms of my area of expertise or what I'm focusing on now, I think there's two crucial elements. One is, and Musk has even started tweeting about this in his own way, of why is everyone getting all up in a tizzy about the Department of Government Efficiency? We're just doing what Clinton did in the 90s with reinventing government, and they cut the government workforce by a lot. And this is both kind of a savvy rhetorical move, also kind of an obstinate one because, they passed legislation to do that. But fundamentally, the kind of, they passed legislation to do that isn't a good response, because what that says is, this isn't a fundamental problem. This is just a technical detail, and they, haven't filled out the right paperwork. And if they're doing the right thing anyway, then why do we care if they're doing it this way or not? Now, there's answers I could come up with that, on that, about centralization of power and blah, blah, blah. But, at the end of the day, it's not a very good answer. The fundamental answer is that was bad then, too. Like, they pretended like they were saving the U.S. society money or, making our society more efficient. What we just had was a less capable government. Government and government employment has nowhere near kept up with the size and the complexity of government and of the economy and all the sort of manifold things that are going on in our society. And a less capable government is less capable of doing various different things, including keeping corporate interests accountable. Like, why are they interested in gutting the IRS? Well, one of the positive things I will say that the Biden administration did, but this is kind of was a little too little too late, was increasing funding to the IRS. And why were they increasing funding to the IRS? So they could go after rich tax cheats. Because if you have no money, then if you have no budget, then the tax cheats you go after are just penny ante poor people tax cheats, or ordinary people, or a small micro business, sole proprietor. You need a big budget if you're going to go after the biggest corporations or society or billionaires for cheating taxes. Well, if you're Elon Musk, if you're the richest man in the world and connected up with all these other ghouls, well, you want to fire 5,000 people from the IRS so they can never go after rich tax cheats ever again. Like, that's a positive thing in government that they don't want to exist, and that's what they're gutting. But, it's not like the Clinton administration or Democrats during the Bush era were pushing hard at increased funding for the IRS to go after rich tax cheats. They were all going in the other direction. Government starvation to make government more inefficient and less capable. But if you're the Democratic leadership now, who are all the same people because they're all just still there and they're 80 or something, Chuck Schumer and the rest, then you have no real effective thing that you can really say that can put all of this together, that can connect the corporate issues and the centralization of power and give a real narrative to push forward. The second thing that I think is important is all the apparatuses that the federal government has can now be easily accessed by the Trump administration and Elon Musk to go after their enemies. Mm-hmm. And these are all apparatuses that not only did the Democratic Party not resist, but they actively encouraged themselves. Well, things that are called, say, anti-money laundering or know your customer laws or countering the financing of terror laws. These are systems where we deputize the banking system, money transmitters, so on, to go after people, to surveil their customers on behalf of government. and do all sorts of capricious things, arbitrarily closing people's bank accounts and so on without any due process, and creating lists, like what's called, the OFAC list, which is basically an office for foreign assets control. But that's not just foreigners, and you can put Americans on this list without any due process, and now you're on that list, and now you are financially blacklisted, or you can't be, say, a legitimate nonprofit. And so, this is something I was tweeting about in October about Samidoun, one of these important Palestinian nonprofits supporting Palestinian prisoners, political prisoners, essentially, who are just arbitrarily detained or convicted in kangaroo Israeli courts. This was something that the Biden administration was doing, in October, right as we were gearing up for the election that ultimately Trump won. And all of this sort of surveillance apparatus, the ability to blacklist people, is there. And that's, one of the really concerning things about that Elon Musk tweet, it's so long, it's got so many things in it, is him talking about how the quote unquote do not pay list is not updated quickly enough. And no one I talked to could figure out what he was talking about because it doesn't make any sense, But one of the things that goes through do not pay is the OFAC list. And so when I read that tweet, what I think, he is talking about being able to add any enemy he wants, any person he wants, any entity to the OFAC list, and to just financially disappear them, essentially. And they can never receive a government payment. But the OFAC list is also a list that goes through the entire banking system. So it means just like, if Musk doesn't like someone, you can be blacklisted from the banking system. And as we're seeing, there's no checks or controls on any of that, except kind of inchoate public outrage. And the Democratic Party willingly handed over this system, built the system so that it could be taken over, and notably did nothing during the lame duck period from Trump being president-elect to being president to stop this. I happened to be in a room in November that, among other things, had a bunch of Democratic Party operatives. And I was like, if you guys really believed that Trump was a fascist, you would destroy all the surveillance data. That's something you would do. And of course, they're Democrats. They never do that in a billion years. But they've handed over a full system that can be used against anyone because it was useful for them. It was useful to go after Palestinian activists and left-wing activists and all sorts of other people and, genuine national security threats, quote unquote, whatever you want to say, with very little due process. And now we'll see where this goes.
I guess the last thing I wanted to ask you was if you had any advice on how we fight what is happening now, the Doge stuff to the attack on the welfare state to Gaza.
I think it's a tricky thing that is going to involve a lot of thinking because, the people first and foremost who are focusing on these issues are resistance liberals. And there is good reason for why leftists are very skeptical, to say the least, to what resistance liberals are taking as important. I would say in this case, forthrightly, I think this stuff is really important. And I don't think that it should be left to resistance liberals. There's a unique opening here where there's a lot of very disenchanted resistance liberals who are finally kind of maybe only momentarily disenchanted with what the Democratic Party is offering up because they're looking for a fight. They're looking for people who are going to confront Trump and Musk and are not seeing it. There are some of these people who normally you'd be eye rolling about how pro-Democrat they are the kind of people who at rallies are yelling at Chuck Schumer. And so I think that there's an opening and opportunity to enter these spaces, to go into sort of physical protests in person at government buildings, obviously, especially in DC, but there's other kind of strategies you can pursue. And at the same time, educate, the Democratic Party has contributed building systems that now Trump and Musk are using, getting people to take privacy seriously, flipping them from their pro-national security, I'm going to look to the FBI to fix things, to look, they're taking over these apparatuses pretty easily, and there's no checks and balances, so that means there wasn't ever really any checks and balances, so you should, except for norms, and you should have a problem with that. And I would say, I think I've generally speaking have positive response from people who are following me kind of more from the resistance liberal angle, two things I have to say about OFAC or anti-money laundering, know your customer laws. Like they're more open than they've ever been before to these criticisms, but it's difficult. It is really difficult. There's a big tension there, and there's a lot of people who certainly are not going to be that willing to listen to you on Palestine or Gaza who are mobilized on this. So I think it's a tricky question that I don't really have anywhere near a full answer to. I would just say, I think this stuff is very important. We can say larger, complex things about what Trump's election has meant for Palestine in general, but I don't think the specific taking over these agencies and their more and more capricious use is going to be good for anyone. And so I think it is worth challenging. It's just tough with what we were left with from, Biden and more than a year of Democratic Party backing genocide and so on. There really is no good answer. We kind of just have to try stuff and figure it out.
Yeah. You can work with people that you wouldn't want to have over for dinner.
That's definitely true.
Yeah.